Screw you, Stacks player.
Hello everyone, thanks for watching my first ever YouTube video. I'm pretty new to this process, and I would appreciate any input you may have on making my videos better in the future in the comment section below. In addition to showcasing MTG gameplay, I also produce altered Magic cards. I have a storefront and other social media if you'd like to check them out, links in the description below. As a final note, I'd like to give a special thank you to my local game store, Smetchrat Games, for giving me a place to film. You can support him as well by stopping by if you're local, or checking out his storefront online. Thank you. Braden will be going first, playing Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger, keeping a hand with a Mountain, a Fabled Passage, a Talisman of Indulgence, Gadrak the Crown Scourge, Solemn Simulacrum, Languish, and a Blightsteel Colossus. I'll be up next with Kurkesh Onakke Ancient, keeping a hand with 4 Mountains, a Traveler's Amulet, Pia's Revolution, and a Soul Foundry. Dan is in the third seat, playing Raff Capashen, keeping a hand with a Snow-Covered Plains, Command Tower, Emergence Zone, Azorius Signet, Narset Parter of Veils, Teferi Master of Time, and Emrakul the Promised End. And last up we have Tim, playing Wart the Raidmother, keeping 2 Forests, a Mountain, a Reliquary Tower, a Saproling Migration, Essence of the Wild, and a Beanstalk Giant. Braden goes first, playing a Fabled Passage, cracking it for a Swamp, and passing turn. I play a Mountain as my land for turn, and cast a Traveler's Amulet, passing to Dan. Dan draws, and plays a Command Tower as his land for turn, and passes to Tim. Tim plays a Mountain, and casts a Satyr's Cunning, making a 1/1 Satyr token, and passing to Braden. Braden plays a Mountain as his land for turn, and casts a Talisman of Indulgence, passing to me. I draw, and play a Mountain as my land for turn, and pass to Dan. Dan draws, and plays a Snow-Covered Plains as his land for turn, casting an Azorius Signet, and passing to Tim. Tim plays a Forest, and casts a Saproling Migration, making 2 1/1 tokens, and passing to Braden. Braden plays a Command Tower, and pays 3 to cast Gadrak the Crown Scourge, and passes turn. I play a Mountain, and pay 3 for a Pia's Revolution, and pass to Dan. Dan plays an Emergence Zone as his land for turn, and pays 4 to cast a Teferi Master of Time. The table collectively asks him why he would do such a thing, and he responds by upticking the Teferi. He draws a card and discards a card, pitching a Frantic Search, and passing to Tim. Tim plays a Mountain as his land for turn, and moves to combat, attacking Teferi with the 2 Saprolings and the Satyr. Before moving to damage, Dan responds, upticking the Teferi again, drawing a card and discarding a Blackblade Reforged. Teferi takes 3 damage, and Tim sends a Beanstalk Giant on an adventure, searching for a forest and putting it into play tapped. Braden draws for turn, and pays 4 to cast a Solemn Simulacrum, searching for a Mountain and putting it into play, before dropping a Rakdos Carnarium as his land for turn and returning a Mountain to his hand. On Braden's end step, Dan upticks the Teferi again, drawing a card and discarding a Factor Fiction. I play a Mountain as my land for turn and cast my Commander. On my end step, Dan upticks Teferi again, drawing a card and pitching a Disallow. Dan draws for turn and plays a Snow-Covered Island, following it up with a Narset Parter of Veils. He immediately uses her -2 ability to look at the top 4 cards of his library and reveal a non-creature, non-land from among them. He reveals an Azorius Cluestone, putting it to hand, and bottoming the rest. Again, he uses Teferi's +1 ability, drawing a card, and discarding the Cluestone. Tim draws for turn, and casts a Skull Clamp, following it up with a Reliquary Tower as his land for turn, and as he moves to equip his Skull Clamp, Braden and I remind him that we would really like to see less Planeswalkers around here, and he sends his 3 tokens at Teferi again. Teferi does Teferi things, and Dan draws a card, and discards a Snow-Covered Island. Teferi takes 3 damage, and Tim follows up with a Beneath the Sands, searching for a forest and putting it into play tap before passing to Braden. Braden drops a Strip Mine, and some assuredly very kind words about Dan being a dirty blue player get thrown around before his command tower is sent to the graveyard. Dan has Teferi do the thing, drawing a card and discarding an Archmage's Charm. Braden casts his commander, and its Enter the Battlefield ability has each of his opponents discard a card. Kroxa is sacrificed to its own ability, and Braden moves to combat, sending the Solemn Simulacrum at Teferi, who takes 2 damage, before Braden moves to his end step, where he gets a Gadrak trigger because a creature died this turn, creating a treasure, and passing turn. I pay 3 for a Burnished Heart, and follow it up by sacrificing a Traveler's Amulet to search my library for a mountain to hand, and put it into play as my land for turn. I move to combat, and in a final effort to save myself more future editing, I attack Teferi with Kurkesh. Dan responds with one final +1, drawing a card, and discarding a route, and Teferi goes to the graveyard. I remember my Pia's Revolution trigger from the Traveler's Amulet. Targeting Braden, he takes the 3, and I pass my turn. Dan draws for turn, and plays an Eye of Ugin. He follows it up by using Narset's -2 ability. He fails to find and bottoms the cards, and elects it's a good time to cast a Supreme Verdict. Braden draws a card from the Solemn Simulacrum, and I target Dan with the Pia's Revolution trigger. He takes the 3, and my Burnished Heart goes to the graveyard. On Tim's turn, he plays a Forest, and casts his commander, who enters the battlefield with 2 Goblin tokens. He immediately equips the Skull Clamp to Wart, and passes turn. Braden plays a Castle Lochthwain, and realizing that he doesn't have enough cards in his graveyard to escape his Kroxa, passes to me. I play a Gilded Lotus and pass to Dan. Dan pays 4 for a Grand Arbiter Augustine, and passes to Tim. Tim draws for turn, and moves straight to combat, sending Wart the Raidmother at Narset Parter of Veils. Dan decides he likes his Grand Arbiter more than Narset, and Narset goes to the graveyard. Tim moves his Skull Clamp to one of the goblins. It dies, and he draws 2. He plays a Forest as his land for turn, and moves the Skull Clamp to the other goblin, drawing 2, before moving it back to Wart again, and passing turn. Braden plays a Phyrexian Arena, and passes to me. On my turn I cast a Gonti's Aetherheart, getting 2 energy as it enters, and I pass to Dan. Dan casts a Teferi Time Raveler, and realizing he played his cards out of order, puts a Commander Sphere into play, and uses that mana to pay for the Teferi. He uses Teferi's +1 ability to give his sorceries instant speed for the turn cycle, and passes. Tim draws, and plays a Forest as his land for turn. He casts an Acorn Harvest, making 2 1/1 squirrel tokens, and he follows it up with a Nissa's Expedition, using Wart's ability to tap 2 squirrels and copy the spell, searching for 2 mountains and 2 forests, putting them onto the battlefield tapped and passing turn. On Braden's upkeep, the Phyrexian Arena triggers. He draws a card and loses a life, and draws for turn. He plays an Overseer of the Damned, destroying Grand Arbiter with its Enter the Battlefield trigger, and putting a 2/2 zombie token into play tapped before passing turn to me. I draw for turn, and pay 6 for a Thopter Assembly. As it enters the battlefield, the Gonti's Aetherheart triggers, giving me 2 more energy, and I pass to Dan. Dan draws for turn, and after taking a quick look at his graveyard, casts an Emrakul the Promise End for 5, and targets Braden with its ability. He follows up by using Teferi's -3 ability to return the Thopter Assembly to my hand, and passes to Tim. On Tim's turn, he pays 2 mana and 3 life to flash back an Acorn Harvest, tapping his 2 squirrels using Wart's ability to copy the spell, and putting 4 additional squirrels into play. He casts a Satyr's Cunning for its escape cost, putting a 1/1 Satyr token into play, and then he casts a Cathartic Reunion, tapping Wart and the 1/1 Satyr to copy the spell, discarding 2 cards and drawing 6. He hard casts a Search for Tomorrow, tapping 2 squirrels to copy the spell, and going to search for 2 forests, putting them into play, and casting a Farseek, copying it as well, getting 2 mountains, and passing turn. We move to Braden's first turn, which is actually Dan's turn. The Phyrexian Arena triggers. Braden draws a card, and loses a life, and draws a card for turn, and Dan's first order of business is to have him play a Humble Defector. They move to combat, and False Braden attacks his puppet master with the Overseer of the Damned, and sends the 2/2 zombie at Tim. Dan blocks the Overseer with the Emrakul, killing it. Tim takes 2 damage, and False Braden pays 4 mana to cast a Languish, which clears away most of the board. Before the end of his turn, he sacrifices his treasure token to the Unseen Gods, and taps his Talisman for a red mana, taking 1 damage, and passing to himself. At the beginning of his turn, Braden's Phyrexian Arena triggers. He draws a card and loses a life, before drawing for turn, and casts a Nirkana Revenant. He follows it up with an Anger, and moves to combat, sending the Anger at Teferi. Dan blocks with his Emrakul, the Anger goes to the graveyard, and Braden passes to me. After untapping, I play a mountain as my land for turn, and I cast Kurkesh from the command zone. I proceed to cast a Mere Welder, getting 2 energy from the Gonti's Aetherheart trigger, and I pass to Dan. Dan uses Teferi's +1 ability, and deciding he wants to leave some mana open, passes to Tim. Tim plays a mountain, and casts a Twinning Staff. He replays his commander, that enters with 2 goblin tokens. He casts a Cultivate, tapping 2 goblins to copy the spell, and the Twinning Staff gives him a 3rd copy. He searches for 2 mountains to the battlefield and 1 to hand, 2 forests to hand, and 1 to the battlefield. He again escapes the Satyr's Cunning, making a 1/1 Satyr token, and equips the Skull Clamp to the Satyr he made. It dies, drawing him 2 cards, and he passes to Braden. On his upkeep, Braden draws a card and loses a life to the Phyrexian Arena, plays a Grixis Panorama as his land for turn. He pays 4 mana and exiles 5 cards from his graveyard to cast Kroxa for its escape cost, having each of his opponents discard a card. He follows up by casting a Tectonic Giant. He moves to combat and attacks Teferi with Kroxa and the Tectonic Giant. The Tectonic Giant triggers, and he exiles the top 2 cards of his library, setting aside a Village Rites. Kroxa's trigger has each of his opponents discard a card, and Tim loses 3 life from discarding a forest. Dan blocks Kroxa with his Emrakul. The Tectonic Giant does 3 damage to Teferi. Kroxa goes to the command zone, and Braden passes turn. I start my turn by casting a Blinkmoth Urn. When it enters the battlefield, the Gonti's Aetherheart triggers, giving me 2 energy. I follow it up by casting a Mere Propagator, getting 2 more energy from the Gonti's Aetherheart, and then I sacrifice it, using its ability to take an extra turn, and copying the ability with Kurkesh. I pass turn to myself and untap. I pay 3 and tap a Mere Propagator, and copy the ability with Kurkesh, putting 2 more Mere Propagators into play. I activate the Mere Welder's ability, making it a copy of Burnished Heart, and follow up by sacrificing the Burnished Heart and copying the ability with Kurkesh, finding 4 mountains and putting them onto the battlefield tapped. I target Braden with the Pia's Revolution trigger, and he takes the 3. The Mere Propagator goes to the graveyard, and I move on to my last turn. At the beginning of my pre-combat main phase, the Blinkmoth Urn puts 5 colorless in my mana pool, and I use it to cast a Mirror Works. I move to cast a Goblin Charbelcher, and Dan responds with a Render Silent. Again I tap the Propagator, copy the ability with Kurkesh, and make 2 more Mere Propagators before passing the turn to Dan. On Dan's turn, he plays a Castle Ardenvale, upticks Teferi, and passes to Tim. Tim starts off with the Dragon Fodder. He taps 2 creatures to copy it, which becomes 3 copies, putting 6 1/1 Goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield. And in words better than I could ever hope to articulate, makes us deeply aware that
Goblins go bird.
he plays a Battle Hymn, and taps 2 creatures to copy the spell, which becomes 2 additional copies, adding 24 red mana to his mana pool. We all begin to fear the Craterhoof, but Tim assures us that he does not own one. He taps for 6 and pays 4 into a Reap the Past, tapping 2 creatures and getting 2 additional copies of the spell, and picks up his graveyard. He repeats the previous process with the Dragon Fodder, copying the spell twice and getting 6 more 1/1 Goblin creature tokens. He casts Grumgully the Generous, following it up with a Kicked Saproling Migration, copying the spell twice, and making 12 Saproling tokens. He casts a Cathartic Reunion, copying it twice, discarding 2, and drawing 9. He casts the Battle Hymn again, copying it twice, adding 84 red mana to his mana pool, and I lament Dan's choice to cast the Render Silent on me. Dan assures me that everything is fine, and Tim in turn assures all of us that it's probably not. Tim casts a Chaos Warp, copying it with Wart, and this time using the Twinning Staff's ability, tapping it, to get an additional copy. He then chooses targets for 5 separate Chaos Warps, and Dan sacrifices his Commander Sphere to draw a card in response. He hits Dan's Teferi, and his Azurius Signet, My Gilded Lotus, and Kurkesh, and Braden's Nirkana Revenant. I'm pretty sure we do this backwards, but Braden reveals a Phyrexian Altar, putting it into play. I reveal only one card, because Kurkesh went to the command zone, finding a Madcap Experiment, and Dan reveals a Kozilek Butcher of Truth, and a Snow-Covered Plains, putting them into play. Tim casts a Molten Birth, winning the flip, and putting it back to hand, and casting it again, copying the spell twice each time. He puts 12 1/1 elementals into play, and casts a Pirate's Pillage, discarding a card, copying the spell twice, drawing 6, and creating 6 treasures. Just as I'm saying I probably won't use this footage, due to not wanting to track all of the triggers, Tim asks if anyone has 40 or more life, we say no, and he casts a Massive Raid, copying it twice, and targeting each of his opponents with one of the copies. We all take 40, and that's game.
There's probably a cooler way to.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and hopefully I'll have time to finish another one by next month. Check back again then, and I'll see you next time.